Everyone, and as Kate says, we're going to look at something a little bit different today. I'd like to look at the differences of various varieties of English. I'm focusing primarily on UK English and on American English, USA English, because those are the two most obvious different varieties. So we'll look at some of those, and if you're familiar with another variety, the same rules, the same tips which I give you will work there. So I've called it lift, pavement, boot versus, or against, elevator, sidewalk, trunk. Well, these are three words, lift, pavement. Oh, I've got.
And it's not half an hour waiting time, right?
Thank you. Right, somebody came in and we're getting a bit of echo there. Okay. So I've chosen three words: lift, pavement, boot, and I've put three words underneath: elevator, sidewalk, trunk, which mean the same. These are fairly common words, but there are some other less common words which we'll come across through the webinar. So let's move on to the first proper slide. So IELTS, the E in IELTS is English, yes, but which one? There are many varieties of English. I recognize at least 15 major varieties of English. I've got my own variety: British English, UK English. I'm also familiar with English from the US, from the United States. I also know that there are major varieties of English from India, from Australia, from the Philippines. Arabic English is beginning to take on a life of its own. So I understand all of these varieties of English. I speak English. So when I hear vocabulary or context which I'm familiar with, I have no problem understanding it. But some are more acceptable than others. Some varieties of English have a sort of cut down grammar, a rather English light grammar. So those are less easy for people to understand. So what is our aim? Our aim is to be understood and to understand in English. And this goes for both spoken and written English, and also from a point of view of receptive English. When you hear or read, you will also see different varieties there. So when we're producing either spoken English or written English, we need to show some consistency. What is acceptable? Well, spoken English is not as sensitive to differences as written English is. Let's give an example. The round black thing on your car is a tyre, T-Y-R-E in UK English. In the United States, it's a tyre, T-I-R-E. Now, obviously, when we hear those, I can't tell how the speaker would spell that word. Canadians sound as if they're speaking with an American accent, some would say, but they generally follow the spelling and the grammar of the UK. In fact, we should talk about which variety is the most common. You could be forgiven for thinking that US English is the dominant force. It isn't. It's possibly the most obvious. We see the spelling of it on the internet. We hear it in Hollywood films. And we see people speaking in American English. However, a great many times you hear an American accent, But when you analyze what's being said, it's actually following a British model. There are about 400 million people using US English, and the rest of us use some form of UK English, British-based grammar, including Canada, which shares a border with the United States. Some of the main areas which have been heavily influenced by American English include Korea, the Philippines, Thailand, but not surprisingly China. China have very firmly taken on British grammar, and although I hear some speakers speaking with what sounds like an American accent, the basic framework and the spelling, mostly in written production from China, that tends to be following the British model. So it doesn't really matter which one you use. We'll go on about how to select one later, but UK English is still the dominant form, probably because the UK, as Great Britain, had such a large, far-flung colonial system, an empire, if you like. So we've got Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Singapore, all of these places using definite British English, and in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Burma, all of these places have got very strong links to British grammar. And when you think about the United States, it wasn't clear that they were going to adopt English even as the national language. We often think of the United States as being something which belonged to Great Britain in the past. Well, some of it did, but a great many places didn't. If you look at the place names in California, they're all Spanish. Los Angeles, San Francisco, this sort of thing, San Diego. This is not English, it's Spanish, because it was part of Mexico. We look at Louisiana. It's named after the French king. The state capital is Baton Rouge. They spoke French and still do in many places. Some parts of Canada still speak French. The French had vast areas of land in North America. This may surprise you. 100 years ago in New York, there were more German language newspapers than English language newspapers. So what's happened in America is that after the War of Independence from Britain, lots of other states, some of them Dutch, German, Spanish, French, joined together, and they decided, right, we need a common language. What will it be? And the French argued for French. The Spanish speakers said, oh, it should be Spanish. The Germans said it should be German, and so on. The problem being, the French didn't understand the Germans didn't understand the Italians knew a little bit of Spanish, but didn't understand the Dutch. They all spoke a little bit of English, and some of the states spoke English. So English won almost by accident and became the language which was adopted. But I suggest that US English isn't the English that I know. Anything that was invented over the last 200 or 300 years after the independence battles is not the same across the Atlantic. So British English and American English broke away. It's coming back together now with the advent of the internet and with better communication and more instant communication and with travel. However, there are still major differences which I'm going to highlight for you. So I'm looking at the two major blocks. I appreciate that there are huge blocks nearer some of you. Some of you hear Indian English models. Some of you hear Australian English, and so on. But I'm choosing the two main blocks to talk at today. So we've got US English and British English. And I'm going to look in three areas: vocabulary, grammar, and spelling. So here we've got a car, a Land Rover, British car. And in Britain, we would talk about the front piece of glass as the windscreen. However, if that Land Rover is exported to America, that piece of glass at the front is called the windshield. At the back, there's a door which I lift up. I call it the boot. I can put shopping in there, golf clubs, what have you. But in America, it's called a trunk. Now, I understand these, but not everybody does. So you need to find out what variety of English is being used, and you can change the vocabulary slightly. So let's stick with the car. I'm going to throw this open to you and show you some words in US English. They're all associated with a car or an automobile, as they would call it in America. So these are the USA words. What do you think these are in British English? And if you could use the chat box, we'll be able to see the chat. You'll find in the drop-down bar at the top on the right-hand side. If you go to chat, let's have a look at the first one, muffler. Who could tell me what that might be in UK English? What do you think a muffler is? So if you go to the chat box, type number 1 and write down what you think it might be. No, not getting anything yet from anybody. How about throwing it open? Have a look at the whole list. There are 6 things there. Choose something from the list. Write the number in the chat box, and what do you think it might be in UK English? Any of those 6 items. Number 5, sidewalk. Somebody said pavement. Okay. Any others? Angela has suggested 6, parking lot. Might be parking space. Okay. Got 5 at walkway, 6 at parking space. Somebody suggested car park for 6. Huh? Interesting. We've got some differences there. Freeway, we've got a suggestion as highway. Huh? Okay, what I'm going to do is take it on to the next slide, which has got the UK versions next to them. Thanks for your answers there. Some of them were correct, others were not. So let's have a look at what it should be. So a muffler is the exhaust, the pipe that takes away the gases from the engine. The turn signal, which puts the orange light left or right, we call an indicator. The hood, underneath the hood is the engine or the motor. We call that the bonnet. The freeway approximates to motorway. Some of you said highway. The sidewalk would be the pavement. I think one of you got pavement. Parking lot is not parking space, but it's a car park. Parking lot, as I understand it, is the whole area with many spaces in it. So we can see that just taking one area, the car or the automobile or the auto, hardly anything is the same. We had the example of tire. Well, that looks the same, but that one's spelled differently. Or, sorry, it sounds the same, but it's spelled differently. So there are some major differences. The same sort of thing can happen with aeroplanes or airplanes. In Britain, we have the body of the aeroplane. Sorry, we have the fuselage of the aeroplane. In America, they'd have the body. We have ailerons, they have flaps. So almost everything which has been invented up until about the Second World War is different. After the Second World War, communication was much better and has got more instantaneous, and we are beginning to come together again when things are invented either here in Europe or across in America or elsewhere. It's an instant naming thing, and we accept the same name everywhere. When communication wasn't so good, we had separate evolution. We had different names being used, and this has caused problems, I must admit. So what you need to do is familiarize yourself with one set or the other and use one set. We'll come on later how we can use our new knowledge. So there's a list of words which are associated with the car, but many other areas have got completely different sets of vocabulary. It is getting better though. Good news, anything new is usually the same name. So let's look at grammar. Grammar too has differences. UK English generally uses a fuller range of tenses for everyday speaking. Obviously, there's formal English and informal English. I would suggest US English is slightly less formal on a day-to-day conversational basis. But let's just compare these. Did you eat lunch yet? It's a perfectly acceptable question. And in the US, that would be how you find out if a person has eaten something that day. I don't use it. Did you eat lunch yet? Well, of course I have. Several times this week, many times over the last year. Of course I've eaten lunch. Because it doesn't mean the same thing to me. An American knows that did you eat lunch yet is about today. Doesn't mean that to me. I would have to ask, have you eaten lunch yet? That's how I ask about today. This perfect tense is very rare in the US. In fact, if I've asked Americans, have you eaten lunch yet? And they say, pardon me, excuse me. They don't understand in many instances what that means. Or they say, oh, you speak funny. But to me, that's how I'd have to ask it. They're perfectly good questions. If you've got a full understanding of English, you know from context what's being asked. But it's different. It's not the same. Moving on, some more grammar. Prepositions. Prepositions seem to cause endless problems with writing in particular. All of these are differences. So the pen fell off of the table, or the pen fell off the table. I guess it's clear what the meaning is with this. We're describing a pen which is no longer on the table it's gone downwards to the floor. Who did it or why it fell, we don't know. But both of those sentences explain that the pen left the table and went downwards. I won't reveal yet which is which, but this is just to show you how differently we use prepositions. So here we've got off of the table, here we've got just off the table. We've got write me. So maybe two friends are leaving. One friend is going to study in another city perhaps, or live in another city. And don't forget to write me. Or they might say, write to me. One of them to me doesn't make sense. One of them is the thing I use every day. I'll reveal which in a moment. Here's another interesting use of prepositions. Visit with my brother or visit my brother. It's fairly obvious that one person is going to see his sibling, his brother. But one of them, if you're not familiar with one variety of English, sounds as if you're visiting some place and your brother is going to accompany you and you're both going to visit somewhere. So there are differences, some of which cause confusion, some of which just don't sound right. So let me reveal to you which is which here. The pen fell off of the table. That's American. I've read that in books. The boat was off of the coast of Connecticut, for example. It's very common. I've asked Americans, why do you say off of? And they say, we don't. But they do. It's very common. Perhaps not everywhere in the US, but you'll see that very, very often. You will hear it too. And it's just one little word, but it's recognizably US English. If we were to put something like this in some writing, with the rest of it as UK English, this is going to jar a bit and we're going to think, that's not right. What's the problem there? And we've got write me, that's US. If somebody said to me, write me, I'm going to write ME. Write to me, that's very different. That means they want to receive a letter or an email from me. Visit with my brother, it means you're going to travel to see your brother who lives in a different place. But I might think that visit with my brother is you and your brother are going to go somewhere else and have a look at it. So I'm not going to use that one, but visit my brother, I travel to see him. So just a few differences of prepositions. They're just examples, there are lots. So just be aware of them. Spelling. Well, here's something that I quite agree with. I think some of the spelling differences which American English has adopted are very sensible. Why British English spells things in a particular way might be hundreds of years old. I'm sure that we spell this word colour and this word centre like that because of the French influence. When the French invaded the UK in 1066, it's almost 1,000 years ago. But I think we've retained the spelling, but the Americans haven't. Two writers, one of them from what was the UK at the time, he was from Ireland, George Bernard Shaw, and Mark Twain, an American novelist and writer, they got together in a club in London and decided that English spelling needed an overhaul. It needed to be changed because it doesn't sound like it's spelled. and it really doesn't. So they suggested that we should spell these two types of word, and these are just examples. It would also cover words like valor, harbor, labor in a different way. Also things like this with the TRE ending should be, and we have words like theatre. And when you listen to it, we don't say tre as we used to in French. We don't use that anymore. We now say te, centre, which is more like ER. So that would be how we spell it. Let's have a look at the differences. Colour, we've lost the U because you don't hear it. Colour, colour. It's sensible for it to be OR. Centre, this ER bit is just an sound. Centre, It's not centre, which would be as we would have spoken in French. Or how about this one? Tire, tire. Same pronunciation, but differences again. Here's an interesting one. Traveling. Yet in American English, they drop an L. Not sure why that is. When we've got this pattern at the end of a word, consonant, vowel, consonant, and when we're extending the word with either ing or ed, then we double the final consonant. So consonant, vowel, consonant, CVC, double the final consonant, then add the ed or ing. That's the rule for British English. In American English, only one L. Not sure why. Because if you say the word, you do hear two L's. Listen, traveling, 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 traveling. I think we say traveling. So that to me sounds like the way we say it. Defense. I spell that with a C. And I stress different places as well. So it's not just the spelling, also the pronunciation of this when we're verbally producing it. So defense for me, defense for American. So the SE bit sounds the same. These have the C and the S have the same sound value, but the stress pattern is different. Defense, defense. Sometimes in English we have a C and an S form, for example, in the word practice. In practice, with the CE, that's the noun form, and with the SE, that's the verb form. So the spelling changes whether we're using noun or verb. There's no such distinction in American English. They use SE for both. There's an easy way to remember it in UK English. The IC ending, I see something concrete. I see a noun. The IS ending, ISE for practice, is a verb. So IS is a verb. I see, practice. I see, a noun. So you can easily remember it. Okay, let's move on. Spelling, more spelling. S versus Z. Two words here. Analyze and analyze. So they both sound the same. One has an S, one has a Z, or as an American would say, a Z. And I wonder which one is correct. So perhaps we could look at the chat again. Can you just write S or Z in the chat? Which one do you think is correct? S or Z? The correct spelling of this word. Okay, some differences of opinion. We've got some Z's or Z's, some S. Majority seem to be going for S. For Z, sorry. Interesting. Okay. Z. All right. Certainly a difference of opinion. Some of you have said S, some of you have said Z. So I just closed that. Here in the Philippines, we used commonly the S. Okay. That's interesting. They're both correct. Lots of people say that one of them's American and one of them's British, but there are people in the UK who spell with either of these. That neither of them is 100% wrong. Neither of them is 100% correct. They're both correct. I think it depends which dictionary you use. Oxford says S, Cambridge says Z, I think. I can never remember. But one of them suggests it should be S, one of them suggests it should be Z. Not a problem. I can't mark one of those wrong because they're both right. What I can object to, though, is if you begin and you say analyze with an S at the top of your essay, then near the bottom you said analyzation with a Z, one of them's wrong. They can't both be right in one essay. Choose one, apply the rules to all of the words which could possibly have it. I'm getting a chat message. Let me see if we've got something more to that. Same with initialize, and yes, all of these words where you have a possibility of spelling it with an S or a Z, they're all okay. All you need to do is choose one. It doesn't matter which. It's not a UK-US problem. They're both okay in British English. In American English, it's generally the Z, but I have seen S's from America too. So yeah, you're right that all words with this pattern at the end, the ISE or IZE. It's interesting that the Philippines uses the S. That is strange because linguistically, most of it is American. That's strange that you've picked up the S there, but thanks for the information. That's good to know. Okay, let's have a look at another slide. So here's my tip for you when you're looking at writing. Learn a set of rules. Whichever one you choose is fine. Then stick to it. If the start of your writing has features of UK or US English, not a problem. The examiners don't make a judgment whether one is right or wrong. It does become a problem when you mix it up. When it has some features of British English, some features of American English, then you're bordering on problem areas, particularly if you're mixing them. If you choose one, it's fine. One or the other, but when it's mixed up, I'm thinking, oh, this is confusing. Is this person writing in British English or American English? There's a sort of ideal we're getting to. We want to be understood and understand the maximum amount of English. But in your writing, it's going to be better for score if you standardize. There's another one which could have an S or a Z, standardize. So spell it with an S or a Z. And whenever you've got a similar type of word, we've had initialize, analyze, standardize, all these types of things with the ISE or IZE. Choose one, apply it consistently. Okay. Any questions? So we've got a good length of time today for questions. Quite often we run out of time. So first of all, any questions at all about application of the differences, and perhaps where can you find out about them? That sort of thing. So questions on that nature first, then we'll throw it open to more general questions about the productive skills, either writing or speaking in English, and how you can apply a consistent way. So let's not look at the receptive skills. Let's not look at listening and reading today, but questions first of all about the differences between British and American English, or any other varieties, and then we'll look at more general questions about the exam. So let me get back to my questions plate. There we are. So from the current slide. No, see, there's one in the Q&A. What about shallow writing? Though the detail is in there, is it okay to get a high score? Shallow. Not sure what you mean by shallow writing. Perhaps Chief Procurement, not sure who that is either. Perhaps Chief Procurement could let me know what you mean by shallow writing. It's not clear to me, so I'll come back to that if you can let me know. Now there's one in chat. Are the examiners flexible enough to accept the variety of usage of UK or US English, for instance, and not to mark down one's writing? Well, they'll mark it down if you mix it. Choose one variety, particularly when you've got the same sort of features. So if you've got analyze ISE at the top, make sure that it's initialize ISE at the bottom. If you have SE and ZE in the same piece of writing, one of them's got to be wrong. Yeah? Something else. So you can use either the chat or the Q&A. Not in depth by words, I mean. Not in depth by words. So what about shallow writing? Though the detail is in there, is it okay to get a high score? Do you mean by formal vocabulary? I still don't know what you mean by shallow or in-depth words. Do you mean the formality? Whether it's like a spoken English variety or whether it's more academic? Common words. Well, okay, what you're looking for is for your reader or listener to be able to understand what you're talking about. If you're not sure of a higher level, more uncommon word, and you use it in an incorrect way, that might obscure the meaning. So you'd be better sticking with words you know very well what the meaning is. I think that's what you mean. We're talking particularly about writing. Yes, if you're not sure what a word means and you're trying to use a word in the hopes of getting a high vocabulary score, but you use it wrong, there'd be a fairly high penalty because you lose meaning. Meaning is the most, it's the thing you must concentrate on. Meaning is paramount. You must get the meaning clear. If the meaning isn't clear, you haven't completed the task and your vocabulary mark will go down. So shallow writing, though the detail is in there. Yes, if you use common words and the detail is clear, you'll be fine. If you try to use a higher level word and you get it wrong or you're not sure of the meaning, then you could pay the penalty. Yeah. Now let's have a look. I did see something there. Something in chat. There we are. Do we need to expound if the word is something from our mother tongue? For example, a sample of local food, lumpia. If the word is something, for example, oh, you've done the same thing. Yes, if you're using a word which is not generally known, you would have to explain. Yes, when I was in Thailand, I used to hear people putting in the names of local food. Food seems to be a thing which you've got a word for it, and it's easier to use the local word than to explain what it is. So, I'm seeing what it is. It's a Chinese roll made up of meat that usually fried. Okay, so like a spring roll. We would call it a spring roll here. Maybe some pork meat or little bits of prawn in it, or shrimp you might call it, and some vegetables as well. Pastry and then deep fried, is that the sort of thing you mean? Yes, a spring roll. Okay. Yeah, you'd have to say either a spring roll or lumpia, not sure how you would pronounce it, which is a local variety of Chinese spring roll, something like that. If you just said lumpia, it's not going to be understood. It's certainly not standard English. So no problem to use it, but yes, you would then have to explain and say, which is the local word for a Chinese spring roll. Okay. Now, anything else in, go back to Q&A, common words in chat. Okay. Any other questions related to differences of language? If we've finished with those, we can go on to throw it open to, okay, I will use fried chicken instead. Yeah, if you might find it difficult to explain something, or you're not sure how to explain it, use a different type of food. I'll let you into a secret. In the speaking part and the writing part too, the examiner can't check whether it's true or not. If you use a different word because it helps you linguistically, it helps you from a language point of view, that's fine. So if you said, my favorite food is, how would I explain that? I'll just put fried chicken. That's fine. I can't check that. I'm not going to follow you to see what you eat. So yeah, you could do that. So let's throw it open to more general things about the productive skills, either writing or speaking in IELTS. Let me get back my PowerPoint. There we are. So any other questions in chat or Q&A? I can't believe I've covered everything about the differences in language. Here we are. Here's a question for me. In part 2 in speaking, can I reread the question? Can I reread? You mean use the question as part of the answer? You could. There's no reason why you can't do that, but the examiner won't be marking those as your words. It'd be better if you could paraphrase it in some way. Answers are what we want, rather than re-asking the question. You get no marks for vocabulary if you read it in exactly the same way as it says on the prompt questions. So yes, you could do it just as a leader into the next part of the speaking, but try to paraphrase it at least, or just answer it. You could say, let's move on now and I'll talk about or whatever. So if we remark our test result, is it true that they're going to send it to Cambridge? Yes, the questions are written in Cambridge. When you go for a remark, it costs a bit of money and takes a bit of time because it has to be couriered to the test centre in Cambridge. What would happen with this sort of thing? It's one of the reasons why IELTS is quite an expensive exam. First reason it's expensive is they test the questions on a vast range of levels and nationalities and cultural groups to see whether there are any questions which throw up odd answers from certain parts of the world. So they make sure that the questions are askable worldwide. Then you probably know during the speaking section, they record what you're saying. That's so that it can be re-listened routinely. About 15% of the speaking tests are listened to by a second examiner who doesn't know what the first examiner scored. The second examiner hears it as if it was the first time of listening. He listened to that score, then he will award it a score. Then the team supervisor will compare the score of the first examiner with the score of the second. If they're within half a band, no problem. The first examiner's score stands. If it's a band or more apart, then it's listened to by a third examiner. And that's usually a team leader or a country supervisor. And they will have the final say. If it's, then there's a challenge. If you ask for it to be retested, then yes, it goes to Cambridge. That's like the Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court, if you like. It's frustrating that IELTS examiners here in our country just for business. I took my IELTS several times. Why is it the test result do not include a feedback? How will I know my areas of improvement? It would cost a fortune if we had to feedback on everything. If I had to write a written report on all 4 sections of the test, you wouldn't like to pay the cost of that. And it's frustrating that IELTS examiners here in our country are just in it for business. I suggest that the schools that try and teach you the right thing, they're the ones in it for business. Examiners are not paid a great deal. We can buy a bowl of rice, but not much else. Now, another one below. You mentioned about being consistent, which forms to use. So if I spell the word analyze in this manner, which I'm used to, you'd recommend I use the word analyzation if I need to use it. Oh, definitely. Yes. Be consistent. If you use Z in one form of the word, you must certainly use it in the other one, or one of them will then be considered as wrong. And if you use another word with the similar construction, so if later in your writing you need to write the word initialize, you should also use a Z in initialize and initialization and initializing. All forms of the word you would need to use a Z or an S, whichever one you're happiest with. But don't mix and match them. And when they're mixed and matched, you draw the examiner's attention to it. So yeah, be consistent is the key. Let's see if I've got anything else. Q&A 3, chat. Oh, one new message. Okay. Here in the Philippines, who marks our writing, Filipinos or British? Okay, when I lived in Bangkok, sometimes I would mark tests from Manila, both from the British Council and from IDP. I sometimes marked tests from Tokyo, from Beijing, from Ulaanbaatar, from Sydney, from Perth, from Singapore, from Kuala Lumpur, from Rangoon. I mark tests from wherever they come from as an examiner. Filipinos or British, I don't know. There may be some Filipino examiners. They'd have to be native speakers. I don't know whether there are any Filipino examiners. I've seen a couple of names which would appear to be Filipinos, though hard to tell. I've seen names like Gonzalez, Rodriguez, this sort of Spanish-based family names, probably Filipino when I've done a second mark, because again, there's a sample of writing. A second person marks them blind just to check. It's for quality control. It's why IELTS is quite an expensive exam. The quality is pretty flat no matter where you take it. Whether you take it at IDP or the British Council or in any country, it could be marked by anybody anywhere. So you're not going to get an easier test center or a more difficult test center. They're all the same. If there are any inconsistent examiners, they'll be found out pretty quickly, and they have to then retest to make sure that they're standardized. If somebody's consistently overmarking or undermarking, it doesn't go on for more than a couple of weeks before we say, hey, there's a problem here. What you're doing is overmarking. Can you do this standardization exercise just to come back into line again? So who marks it? Well, it's probably a native speaker, probably from, I don't know, Australia, Ireland, UK, could be South African. I know quite a few South Africans. I know several German IELTS examiners, but their English is superb. So yes, if you've got some Filipinos who've passed the tests, they could be markers too, not a problem. It's usually a native speaker, but if you're at native speaker level, why not? Yeah. Now I see there's some more questions coming in on another side. Why is it very difficult to get a band score of 7 in UK VI? Right, first of all, UK VI is exactly the same test as IELTS. The same test goes out every Saturday or occasionally Thursday, and it's not different. So why is it difficult to get a band score of 7? Because it only goes up to 9, 7 is difficult. But it's no more difficult in the VI version than the standard version. Why is IELTS UK VI more expensive than the other since we have the same test? What's the big deal in video taking and recording compared to other? Okay, you must complain to the hundreds of Chinese people who tried to cheat. Lots of Chinese people sent their cousin or their brother or whatever who'd studied in America for 6 years to take the test for them. Here in the UK, there were many hundreds of people who arrived in the UK with certificates saying band 6.5, band 7, band 7.5. And when they were spoken to, they were nowhere near. And it came to the attention of the authority, the university authorities, that this person cannot possibly speak at band 6. They're 4.5 at best. And we found out that many of them were sending in professional people to take the test for them. Quickly going past with an ID card and having a look at the picture is not a good way of checking someone's identity. But videoing them all the time and having biometric identification is much more secure. So it's expensive because of the technology and the extra layer of security on the VI version. Another question. We prefer to be examined by foreign examiners rather than Filipinos. They have their own set of rules that we don't know well. In fact, English is not our first language. Yes, I know it's not, and I agree with you. I think lots of Filipino English teachers teach rules which I don't recognize. They're insisting on some sort of model which I don't know about. But as I've told you, any rotten apples, any examiners who are not being consistent will soon be found out. A bit more difficult in the speaking, but perhaps you just need to challenge the answers more often. As I said, about 15% are routinely double marked, and then a few of those go to be triple marked. But it shouldn't happen, but if you prefer, yeah, I can see why you might think that. So, Kella says, sir, task 1 marked 6, task 2 marked 7. What would be the final mark? 6.5 or 7? I haven't got my figures with me. Task 1 is 6, task 2 is 7. It's going to be a 7 because task 2 is 67% of the writing. So you've got 67% at 7 and 33% at 6. So yes, it's near a 7. Now, why is it more expensive? Why is it very difficult to get a 7 in writing? It isn't. You just have to write something at band 7. Why is it very difficult? Maybe you just keep doing practice tests rather than trying to change what you write. It's pretty easy to learn what's needed, and we learn to write by reading. So get some model answers in, and then you'll begin to produce them. And then 7 is not so high. There are still 2 bands above it. You still have permission to be wrong and still get a band 7. Okay, another one. But we are not Chinese, we are Filipinos, and we are not cheaters anyway. Why is it you come up with a decision in general? So that we can be consistent throughout the world. There were some Arabic people doing it. We noticed it first with Chinese speakers, then there were some Arabic students who it was proved later were not present for the first test. And why would we do it only in China? Then they would be annoyed. And can you hand on heart say all Filipinos have never sent in their brother who used to live in America? I can't. I think where it's possible to abuse the system on such a high stakes exam, you will get people who abuse the system. So I'd like to think that people are honest, but I know they're not. I know that not everybody follows the rules. It happened in Thailand on at least 2 or 3 occasions that I know as well. But it was because of the vast population. In Beijing, every Saturday, 7,000 people take an IELTS test. So we can't just apply the rules in one place and not elsewhere. It has to be worldwide. So I would suggest that there would be some cheaters everywhere where they've seen a way of going around the rules and cheating and getting that certificate in their hand. So to say we are not cheaters, yeah, the vast majority of people are not. The vast majority of Chinese are not. But when you ramp up the numbers, you get hundreds of Chinese people who we've proved have cheated. I'm sure we'll find some Filipinos who've cheated, just as we'll find some Arabic-speaking cheaters, some Thai-speaking cheaters. When you can change the results by sending someone else in, they'll try it. It's such a high-stakes exam, so I have sympathy that it's gone for everybody, but that's what it is now. So how many words in task 2 can you suggest to get band 7? Well, that depends on the quality of the words. If you wrote, for example, and then we and then we and then we doesn't matter how many words you write, that's not band 7. It's quality rather than quantity. What I do know is you cannot possibly write more than 375 words and be able to check it for quality. Let's have a look at another one. Francis again. If you get 7 in task 1, 6.5 in task 2, do you still get 6.5? Yes, the majority of that is 6.5. Task 2 is worth 67%. Task 1 is worth 33%. So yes, the majority of the mark would be at 6.5. So the 7 is not enough to take it up. Okay, anybody else? The average Filipino got their band score 7 after 5 takes of IELTS. I have a friend who took IELTS via British Council 5 times, got 6.5, while only 6 times via IDP, got 8. Well, he'd improved then. By the time he got to IDP, he'd learnt from his mistakes. If you want to save money, don't go until your tutor says you're ready. Do a practice test under exam conditions, not just the writing, but do a whole test and see what you would score. That just shows that 5 attempts at the British Council, he hasn't learnt anything until his 6th time. Something stuck. He's changed his way of writing. As I've said, I've marked tests which started in an IDP test centre, and I've marked tests in a British Council test centre. It doesn't matter where you took it, it could be marked by the same examiner. Some of the guys at the British Council used to go to IDP on a Thursday, and once a month that they used to do it on Thursday in Bangkok, and on Saturday would do it at the British Council. So it might even be the same examiner. Let's see what we've got else. If I got 7 in task 2 and not finished task 2, am I going to make it? If you look at my Facebook post of the other day, I do a worked example of the mathematics of this. This will scare you. If you write, let's say, 400 words and you take 51 minutes to write a task 2 essay, if that essay is perfect and scores band 9, and then you write nothing or a very poor task 1, do you think you score band 9? No. You get 67% of band 9, which is 6.5. It's an absolute waste of your time going more than 40 minutes on task 2. You need to give time to get task 1. The writing is 2 parts together. You can't win it back by writing a superb task 2, because 33% of the mark is task 1. If you make a real mess of task 1, you've made a mess of the writing test. The task 2 won't pull it back. Okay, and we're over our time, so I see there are no new questions in either the Q&A or in the chat, so I'll round it up there. Thank you very much for listening. Some really interesting questions at the end. To summarize, get one system in your mind, use one system, don't mix and match it, that would be safest. and attempt both sets on the writing. You can't make a good attempt at one and bring up the other one sufficiently. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you again soon, and we'll look at another topic which will help you make the best score you possibly can, and we'll get to that 7 or 7.5 that you need. So thank you very much. See you next time. Bye-bye.